In order to be successful, and you people are well on the road to success,
Rule 1. Love what you do.
How important is success? How important is money? And how important is money to success?
so to me, success was important, but you know, and I think this is true for almost everybody in the room, I think you have to love what you do. If you don't love what you do, you're not going to be successful. And I loved what I did. I did real estate. I went in early. I always loved sports. I would have loved to be any kind. I'm not a bad golfer, right? And you know, but I always
We won.
We won.
We won.
We're gonna always win, you and I. We're never gonna lose.
They choked. They choked. Did they choke?
They choked.
They were chokers.
They choke like dogs, right?
Chokers and losers.
When I talked about success, I always started, you have to do something you love. If you don't do what you love, you're most likely not going to be successful. And you know, you're going to have a lot of people, your parents included, they're going to be saying, don't do that, don't do that. And you have to listen to them. They're wise, they've been around, they've seen. And sometimes, and I tell people, sometimes they go into a business where basically you can't be successful. You know, nobody's successful. If you can get away from that, get away from it, if you can. But you have to make sure that you do something that you love. Try to go into something that you love that can be a good business. So, you know, a lot of people go into businesses that
Don't work.
are just not good.
So,
in order to be successful, and you people are well on the road to success, you have to find out what makes you excited, what makes you want to get up each morning and go to work. You have to find it. If you love what you do and dedicate yourself to your work, then you will gain momentum. And look, you have to. You need the word momentum. You will gain that momentum. And each success will create another success. The word momentum. I'll tell you a story that's very interesting for me. When I was young, there was a man named William Levitt, Levittown. You have some here, you have some in different states. Anybody ever hear of Levittown? And he was a very successful man, became unbelievable. He was a home builder, became an unbelievable success, and got more and more successful. And he'd build homes, and at night he'd go to these major sites with teams of people, and he'd scour the sites for nails and sawdust and small pieces of wood, and they'd clean the site so when the workers came in the next morning, the sites would be spotless and clean. And he did it properly. And he did this for 20 years, and then he was offered a lot of money for his company. And he sold his company for a tremendous amount of money, at the time especially. This is a long time ago. Sold his company for a tremendous amount of money. And he went out and bought a big yacht. And he had a very interesting life. I won't go any more than that because you're Boy Scouts, so I'm not going to tell you what he did. Should I tell you? Should I tell you? Oh, you're Boy Scouts, but you know life. You know life. So, look at you. Who would think this is the Boy Scouts, right? So he had a very, very interesting life. And the company that bought his company was a big conglomerate. And they didn't know anything about building homes, and they didn't know anything about picking up the nails and the sawdust and selling it and the scraps of wood. This was a big conglomerate based in New York City. And after about a 10-year period, they were losing a lot with it. It didn't mean anything to them, and they couldn't sell it. So they called William Levitt up, and they said, would you like to buy back your company? And he said, yes. I would. He so badly wanted. He got bored with this life of yachts and sailing and all of the things he did in the south of France and other places. You won't get bored, right? You know, truthfully, your workers, you'll get bored too, believe me. Of course, having a few good years like that isn't so bad. But what happened is he bought back his company. And he bought back a lot of empty land. And he worked hard on getting it zoning. And he worked hard on starting to develop. And in the end, he failed, and he failed badly. Lost all of his money. He went personally bankrupt. And he was now much older. And I saw him at a cocktail party. And it was very sad because the hottest people in New York were at this party. It was the party of Steve Ross. Steve Ross, who was one of the great people, he came up and discovered, really founded Time Warner. And he was a great guy. He had a lot of successful people at the party. And I was doing well, so I got invited to the party. I was very young. And I go in, but I'm in the real estate business. And I see 100 people, some of whom I recognize, and they're big in the entertainment business. And I see, sitting in the corner, was a little old man who was all by himself. Nobody was talking to him. I immediately recognized that that man was the once great William Levitt of Levittown. And I immediately went over. I wanted to talk to him more than the Hollywood show business communications people. So I went over and talked to him. And I said, Mr. Levitt, I'm Donald Trump. He said, I know. Said, Mr. Levitt, how are you doing? He goes, not well at all. And I knew that, but he said, not well at all. And he explained what was happening and how bad it's been and how hard it's been. And I said, what exactly happened? Why did this happen to you? You're one of the greats ever in our industry. Why did this happen to you? And he said, Donald, I lost my momentum. I lost my momentum. A word you never hear when you're talking about success, when some of these guys that never made 10 cents, they're on television giving you things about how you're going to be successful. And the only thing they ever did was a book and a tape. But I'll tell you, it was very sad, and I never forgot that moment, and I thought about it. And it's exactly true. He lost his momentum, meaning he took this period of time off, long, years, and then when he got back, he didn't have that same momentum. In life, I always tell this to people, you have to know whether or not you continue to have the momentum. And if you don't have it, that's okay. Because you're going to go on, and you're going to learn, and you're going to do things that are great. But you have to know about the word momentum. But the big thing, never quit, never give up, do something you love. When you do something you love, as a scout, I see that you love it. But when you do something that you love, you'll never fail. What you're going to do is give it a shot again and again and again. You're ultimately going to be successful. And remember this, you're not working. Because when you're doing something that you love, like I do, of course I love my business, but this is a little bit different. Who thought this was going to happen? We're, having a good time. We're doing a good job. Doing a good job. But when you do something that you love, remember this, it's not work. So you'll work 24/7, you're going to work all the time, and at the end of a year, you're not really working. You don't think of it as work. When you're not doing something that you like, or when you're forced into do something that you really don't like, that's called work, and it's hard work and tedious work. So as much as you can, do something that you love, work hard, and never, ever give up, and you're going to be tremendously successful. Tremendously successful.
Rule 2. Hard work.
Donald, good to have you with us.
Well, thank you, Steve.
And congratulations again for being on the billionaires list.
Oh, good.
We always underestimate you, but...
you do, but that's okay. That's all right.
Those who deal with you underestimate you and live to regret it.
It's always good to be underestimated.
Your own business. Your father was successful in real estate, obviously been highly successful. What did you learn from your father?
Well, he loved to work, and he was happy. He was a happy man. He wasn't, one of these guys, and I know many of them, and you know many of them, they're in their psychiatrist every day. I say, what do you do? My father was a worker, and he loved to work. He'd work on Saturdays. He'd work on Sundays. He just liked it. He'd go to church, but after church, he'd go and work. He'd go check a building that he was putting up in Brooklyn. He was mostly in Brooklyn and Queens. And he just loved it. And I think more than anything else, not because of what he taught me lots of different things, but I watched him be a happy man and work until he was like literally 93. He was 93 years old when he died. And I said to myself, that's a pretty good formula, because I have a lot of friends, they take vacations for 6 weeks and 8 weeks and 3 months, and they're never happy. So I watched my father, so I like to work.
Rule 3. Be frugal and save at all times.
You're in New York City, like one of the most competitive places in the world. How do you stand out as a young man? How did you stand out? What did you do? And then how do you stay relevant in that environment that's so vicious?
So when I was young, I wanted to, well, my father built in Brooklyn and Queens, the boroughs, and he did a great job. He was a very strong guy, but a good guy, a guy with a tremendous heart, but he was strong, very powerful type of personality. And he built single family housing, whatever he built, but he'd save the nails and the sawdust and the chips of wood, and he'd take them and sell them. I mean, it's like extreme, but he was very extreme. I'll give you a quick story. So we have apartment buildings, and I walked to my father's desk in Brooklyn. This is a long time, I was young, and there's a picture of a roach, a cockroach, on a can, like a paint can, a 5-gallon paint can, and it's sitting on his desk. I said, Dad, what the hell is that? The cockroach was turned upside down, dead. And it said, the name of the product was Bye Bye Roach. And my father said, you know, this stuff is the greatest stuff we've ever used, but it's too expensive. I don't like it. So I'm sending it up to your uncle at MIT. They're going to analyze it. He's going to send it back and tell me what ingredients are in. I said, what are you doing, Dad? He said, I can save $4 a gallon. I say, Pop, is it really worth it? He said, yeah, it's worth it. That's the way you make money. And to a certain extent, you know, it's not penny wise. You got to save the pennies. You got to be, that's a great thinking. So he wants to take something that's expensive, that's good, and send it up to a laboratory at MIT, find out what the ingredients are, because he can save a couple of dollars a gallon.
Rule 4. Perseverance.
What do you attribute that to?
Well, I think one thing is perseverance. I mean, when things were tough at the beginning of the 90s for me and everyone else, the problem with me is I was getting all the publicity.
The Great Depression, you call it.
I call it the Great Depression of the early 90s, because we were really in a real estate depression. And it was real estate and retailing and airlines and various other businesses. They were in a total depression. They weren't in a recession. And I survived. Most people didn't survive. I mean, a lot of my friends, a lot of good people and bad people had to go bankrupt, and you know, never heard from them again, and you probably never will hear from them again. But you know, I survived to a point where the company is much bigger now than it ever was, and much stronger financially than it ever was, and I wrote a book about it.
But in the early 90s, you faced the possibility of losing everything. In fact, on paper, you had lost pretty much everything.
I had faced the possibility of losing everything, and I went back to work. I focused my mental energies and all of my energies.
You never thought of giving up?
No, I think one of the reasons I really succeeded, and bigger than even in the 80s, is the fact that it's a little word called perseverance. I didn't stop.
It's quite a long word, actually.
It's a long word, come to think of it, but I didn't stop. And I did persevere. I went against a lot of odds. And I came up with a phrase, survive till 95. That was in the early 1990s. And it turned out to be right, because the world changed, the economy changed, and there was a survival tactic till a certain year. And in 1995, things started changing. But I mean, it really started changing for me almost right at the beginning, because I went back to work. I refocused my energies.
How desperate were you at that time?
Well,
how depressed did you get?
Well, to start off with, I really blame myself a little bit, because I've always been able to pick markets, and I really wasn't focused toward the end of the 80s, because I was having too good a time. I was enjoying my life too much. Things were going too well.
You dropped your guard.
I did drop my guard, and it's no different than you. If you do 15 great interviews, you know, you sort of, on the 16th, you can take it easy, because, well, that happens in life. That's a human trait. And I did drop my guard, and what I did is I re-put up my guard and re-put up my defenses and my offenses much stronger than I ever did in the 80s, and worked probably harder than I did in the 70s and 80s, and actually became much more successful.
You had to believe in your own abilities. Wasn't there a time when you thought, I really can't hack it, I should get out of this? I'm not suited to this.
There were some pretty depressing times, because I had owed billions and billions of dollars. 975 million or so was personally guaranteed. And that's a pretty deep hole. And when you're that deep in debt, you're mired in debt, and you're that deep in debt, I mean, that's a pretty rough situation to be in.
Rule 5. Getting even.
You talk in your book about getting even, the importance of getting even. Is revenge sweet?
I believe strongly in getting even. If somebody has hurt you, if somebody's gone out of their way to hurt you, I think that if you have the opportunity, you should certainly go out of your way to do a number on them. And I've had more criticism about that one statement in my book than any other statement. The clergy is called, the ministers, the priests, the rabbis, they've all said, what a terrible thing to say. That's against our teachings. I just believe it. I believe in an eye for an eye.
If you did turn the other cheek, as the clergy are presumably suggesting to you, what would that do to your reputation in business circles here in New York, do you think?
Well, I don't know what it would do to my reputation. I just don't believe instinctively in turning the other cheek. If somebody was out to hurt you, if somebody was out to do a number on you, I really believe that you should just do a number on them if you get the chance.
Can you give me an example?
Well, there were people that I really helped in business when things were very good in the 1980s and when my company was going good. And they did not lift a finger to help me when I needed it. And there were a couple of them that could have very easily helped me. Now I have the opportunity to do a number on those people, and I will tell you I'm having a lot of fun with the opportunity.
Rule 6. No alcohol, no drugs.
Gets to your children. You have 3 of them in the business now. How did you coax them? How did that come about? Because usually if a parent wants you to do it, kids say, no, if you want it, I don't want it.
You know, I was blessed to have smart children. They did well in school, they got good marks, they didn't have problems. But also, I would...
What kind of environment you create for that to happen? Because you have a lot of smart kids who just
Right, you have many smart kids that don't do well, and you have some kids that aren't so smart that work very hard that do very well. I mean, I've seen it many times. But I've been recognized for having done a good job. Now, I have 5 children, but the 3 that are in business, and a lot of it's because of the success of The Apprentice, where they go on and people get to know Ivanka and Don and Eric. But a lot of that was early upbringing. I'd always say to them, no drugs, no alcohol, no cigarettes. And now I add for Barron, and I'd drive them crazy. I'd say every time they'd leave, no drugs, no alcohol, no cigarettes. Repeat after me, and I'd have to repeat. They'd go, Ivanka would go, Dad, will you leave me alone? But I drum it into their heads. And you know, you have to get through those artificial barriers. I call them artificial barriers because you can do something about it until it's too late. Once it's in your system, it's very hard to stop. Like, I don't drink, and it's very easy for me not to drink. I tell people, what are you drinking for? What are you drinking for? And they don't even understand what I'm saying
so
because it's so hard.
How did you, it's amazing when people see you, they can't imagine. No alcohol.
Oh, would I be in trouble if I was a drinker? With my life.
No smoking.
Yeah, no smoking. Well, I had a brother.
No drugs.
I had a brother, Fred, who was sadly an alcoholic, a serious alcoholic, and he was the best-looking guy you've ever seen.
And he was much older than you.
He was much older. He was 10 years older than me, 11 years older than me, and he was as good-looking a guy as you've ever seen. He had everything going. The best personality. I have like a bad personality compared to Fred, but he started drinking, and he also smoked a lot. But he started drinking, and I think it started in college, frankly, but it got progressively worse. And he was really unable to stop. And he'd always tell me, don't you ever drink. So he was much older than me, and it really has an impact, you know, when you have that kind of an age difference. But he'd point, don't you ever drink and don't you ever smoke. He'd add the smoking in because he smoked and he drank. And it hugely affected his health and hugely affected even his look and his, you know, the whole bearing. And every time he'd see me, he'd say, don't you ever drink and don't you... So I never drank. I mean, I really, when you talk about my father, I learned a lot from my father, but I learned a lot from my brother, Fred. And he set an example. It wasn't maybe the example that people would think, but it really was, in its own way, an example.
Rule 7. Know your true friends.
And the vultures are circling around you.
Well, you had plenty of vultures. You had plenty of bad people circling, and some good people that frankly wanted to get paid. But it was hunker down time, as they say in Georgia, and I did do that.
Did you learn some lessons about the people who were your friends and the people who weren't your friends?
I wrote once.
Painful lessons.
They were painful, and I wrote once that I would love to sort of have a bad period financially, just to see who my friends would be and who my enemies would be. Now, I'll never write it again because it's not fun.
And it might be a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Well, that's true. And so I don't want to write it again. I wrote it once, and I had that down period. And that down period, I learned a lot. I learned a lot about myself. But I will tell you, I also learned that there are some very good friends out there for me, and there were some people that did not help.